Hey, deserving listeners. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's see what happens and let's see what comes flying out of my face.
Every single one of us makes mistakes. Not a single one of us has lived a perfect life. And realistically, a lot of us have probably broke the law at some point or another and not got caught. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm sure people drove drunk, haven't been caught, right? But again, if you get caught, you're in the same situation I'm in, but for a different thing.
No, we're not. No, we're not. Even if someone got caught with a DUI, I don't know how to rank these things, but I would not put that in the same, even in close, I wouldn't even put that. Anyway, so in terms of the way they're editing it, it appears that she's trying to justify what she did retroactively. So this reveals either an intense defense to retain her self-esteem or her self-image as a good person, and she does have some capacity for empathy, or she doesn't, and she either unconsciously or consciously is just trying to evade judgment. It's just fascinating that she agreed to be in the documentary, because I would imagine most people would hesitate to do that. And the fact that she admitted, I got to keep watching here because it's just so interesting. This could still be within the passive-aggressive personality disorder hypothesis. It obviously could be in the psychopathy, antisocial, sadistic clump there. And it could be, 12 other things as well and beyond. So the fact that she's justified, because if she were more ashamed, it wouldn't make any sense, because then why does she do it for so long? I mean, the only reason why she stopped is because she got caught, right? So I don't know, but with passive-aggressive personality individuals, they do have empathy, but it's rudimentary to some extent because of their trauma growing up. And generally speaking, though, they come across as genuinely caring people that you can trust. But they have this hidden aggression, this hidden hostility, because they have no ability to express it even consciously to themselves. So they will notice that as they are functioning through life, that they will be doing these hidden hostile things to other people. But they have empathy, so but they have this need, and so they might, scale back. They might try to scale back on it, but then they need to engage in it because they have all this anger that has to come out. And they have to wrestle with that. They have to figure out how to justify that. How do they make sense of that, right? That they're a good person and they're doing this horrible thing. And they'll say, well, so this would be one of the things that you could start to tell yourself. If I'm right about this, which I'm sure I'll never know, for people with passive-aggressive personality, they started to engage in the hidden hostility when they were very young, when they were 5 years old even. It was not very sophisticated back then, and they wouldn't have sophisticated ways of defending it to themselves. But as they age, they start to learn morality and have morals, and they have this pattern, this need. They have to figure out, why am I and then they start to tell themselves these stories. Maybe they heard it or they just invented it. So this would be one of the things that she could have been telling herself since she was 12 years old. It obviously doesn't resonate with me, and I can't imagine it resonating with anybody. And I want to also point out that sadistic psychopaths typically don't have these kinds of justifications. I mean, they could, but I don't know, it just feels like it would come out differently. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of variation. Let's continue watching.
So I do feel that, people lose sight of that. I know to some, I'm a headline, I'm a villain, I'm a bad mom, I'm a whatever. But that's because they know one little piece of my story.
Okay, so let's continue. Maybe she has in her mind some justification. I can't imagine. The only explanation would be that someone was putting a gun to her head and she was in an abusive relationship and someone was forcing her to send all those texts, like her husband or something like that. It's outlandish, it's possible, and that would be the only thing that, to my mind, for me, would exonerate her even somewhat.
She was fun, outgoing, like the life of the party. We've been on tons of cruises, probably about 6 or 7 cruises, some girls' cruises, some family cruises.
I said, ladies!
She does like attention, I think. If she was here right now and you were talking to me, she would be dancing over there to try and get you to look at her.
That's interesting because, of course, a documentary isn't going to encapsulate someone's full presentation, but that is not the way she has been presented in the edit thus far.
But as far as like being there for people and being a good person, yes. I mean, she would help you.
So, I don't know. Maybe people emailed for me to watch this to hypothesize about personality, not necessarily saying anything about these individuals, but to just educate about personality in general. So I will do that. That we would often be alerted to the construct of narcissism as we're presented with this data. It's not a strong indicator of that at all. According to the cousin, she likes to party and she likes to get attention. Certainly a lot of people do, within reason, right? And she's also saying, but my cousin was also a good person. She'd be there for you, So that is away from psychopathy. Now, you can be narcissistic and still have a lot of empathy and care for others, or you could be on the spectrum, right? There's a spectrum. But it doesn't rule out passive-aggressive personality, by the way. So I'm just speaking off the top of my head.
I could, before all this, I probably could have called her anytime and said, I need you to do this, and she would be there. She was the baseball coach for Lauren. She was basketball coach for Lauren. So she always seemed to be very involved.
Her being a mom, I thought she was great at what she's done, with Lauren and made sure she was always there.
Yeah, that's the way it looked. I, of course, was holding out for the possibility that we would hear different. Sean would know. Now, maybe Sean's a bad judge of character. Maybe he didn't see what was happening behind the scenes. Maybe it's edited in a certain way, the documentary. But according to cousin and Sean would know that, generally speaking, Kendra has been a good mom. So this is pointing away from psychopathy and away from general sadism. So that is more support for passive-aggressive or some other explanation.
I'm gonna stop for a little bit, and then they picked back up. In my mind, I'm like, how long do we let this go on? What do I do as a parent? Honestly, the best way would have been to stop it by shutting her cell phone down, right? But then I was like, well, why should she have to do that,
Okay, I'm confused. She is talking as if the vast majority, or for several months, she was not the one sending the texts, and she's just a concerned mom. The way she was talking to the law enforcement officer, they didn't lock down any dates on camera anyway, or the footage they showed us. But my impression, based on what she was saying, was that fairly quickly she started to become at least one of the perpetrators, which raises the other. I tend to believe her statement when the police arrived, because she had every reason to minimize or lie or something. And she pretty quickly said, well, it wasn't me at first, but then I started doing it. It sounded credible. Who knows? And it kind of fits, because that would be one pathway where someone does cyberbully her daughter and she sees the effect, and she's not of that age, so she wouldn't know the syntax, and she is seeing the syntax and going, oh, okay. So, and then she copycat, because the syntax was very childish, So, and what did I say in the very beginning? I was like, it kind of seems like it's an adult and a kid, and it sounds like an adult and a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old. It's kind of true. So it raises the question, who was the original person that's sending the text? That person's probably trying to hide in a hole. I mean, they'd be older by now anyway. So, but now she seems to be saying, well, what is she saying?
Why should I have to get her a new cell phone? Because of someone else's actions, right? I really wanted to get to the bottom of who it was, right? And that's when I started sending the text messages to Lauren and Owen.
Now, they edited that, so God knows, but what? That doesn't make any sense. I wanted to figure out who was bullying my daughter and her boyfriend, so I started to bully my daughter and her boyfriend? Huh? Maybe as a way to draw out the bully would say, hey, that's not me. And what do you mean? Who are you?
I was sending the messages in hopes that maybe they would send back asking, is this somebody or is this so-and-so, to just kind of give me something, right? And then also hoping that as they maybe talked about the messages amongst like their friend groups and stuff, that something might come up that could help pinpoint.
Yeah, that is what she's saying. What? Am I missing sometimes I miss things, I'm just one person, but, Am I missing something? I mean, she's talking as if it makes sense what she's saying, but it doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to you? Let's rewind that.
Honestly, the best way would have been to stop it by shutting her cell phone down, right? But then I was like, well, why should she have to do that? Why should I have to get her a new cell phone? Like, because of someone else's actions, right? I really wanted.
Okay, I'm following her thus far. They're editing it, so we can't know, but I'm following her thus far.
To get to the bottom of who it was, right? And that's when I started sending the text messages to Lauren and Owen. I was sending the messages in hopes that maybe they would send back asking, is this somebody or is this so-and-so, to just kind of give me something, right? And then also hoping that.
Oh, so she's hoping that Lauren and Owen will say, you kind of sound like Chloe. Is this Chloe? And then she's, oh, Chloe. Then I'll look into that. What? Okay. So is that possible? I suppose. But the way it looks is that when she was caught and she confessed immediately, if this were true, she would have said it, right? She would have said, oh, no, you don't understand. It's such a... So I was trying to investigate and, of course you would say that in the moment, especially your daughter's there, your husband's saying we're done, you're looking at a felony charge. You would say something in the moment if there was an explanation, right? And that's why she had that earlier clip that they included where she said, it was a shock and it was a whirlwind of, she didn't use those words, but that kind of thing. It was like when the police showed up, I was confused and it was overwhelming. And that's why I didn't say all of these reasons, but what? I mean, I imagine according to the law, it doesn't matter. This isn't a justification, right? Unless someone had a gun to your head, then there's no justification for doing this.
As they maybe talked about the messages amongst like their friend groups and stuff, that something might come up that could help pinpoint, where they were originating from.
Okay, that's starting to look a little psychopathic. I don't know. It's also just lacking in intelligence, lacking in sophistication, lacking in common sense. If she were operating from that principle, which I imagine she probably wasn't, the way it looks is she's trying to justify it after the fact. And in the interim number of months since she got caught and she was being interviewed for the documentary, she, in her addled, unsophisticated brain, came up with this. This is her excuse. I was trying to suss out the real bully by becoming the bully. There's that trope in the crime thriller movies. In order to catch the serial killer, you had to become the serial killer. In order to catch the cyberbully, the mom had to lower herself and become the cyberbully. And then she caught the cyberbully, but at a cost. I can see the movie now.
I started in the thoughts of, we need some answers. And then it just kept going. It was a spiral. Kind of a snowball effect.
Okay, it's possible that it's still within that column of passive-aggressive personality that at first it was the way that she describes it. And then she says it's a spiral. It could have hooked her need to express hostility towards anyone, maybe even directly at her daughter in this hidden, very hidden way. And at first it wasn't like that. And then she says it spiraled. What was that?
I don't think I knew how to stop. I I was somebody different in those moments. I was in an awful place mentally. It was like I had a mask on or something. I don't even know who I was.
Yeah, this is all fitting. There could be other explanations as well, but I'm just telling you what's in my head. I'm not officially assessing her. I'm going off of a short documentary. When I diagnose people with any personality disorder, passive aggressive maybe in particular, it'll take me months of assessment. But I think people tune in to watch me react to shows like this to educate. And so I'm just talking about what I would be pursuing and the data points that I would be cataloging. I want to point out that there's a lot of editing. They're chopping the interview up. So it could be completely Frankenstein together in a very deceptive way. Sometimes they're just cutting because there's extraneous sentences or there's silence or something. So that can happen, but we just can't know is the thing. So I'm not saying anything about her because we just don't know.
She just kind of changed. She was more introverted, didn't reach out as much. I guess more self-absorbed too, maybe.
Sometimes it was an hour a day or 8 hours.
All right, so the cousin is throwing out the self-absorbed line. I don't know what she means by that. I'd be curious. People hearing that would think, ooh, narcissism, right? And the thing that I have to remember is that the cousin is online probably looking for answers herself during all this, right? That would be the first place you'd go to, right? Unfortunately. And the narcissism discourse online is 99% bullshit. People really have no idea what they're talking about, and they're talking about it. Even other clinicians, I have to say. Not all, but some. So for the cousin, if she went online and was even asking direct questions or just passively like, what's wrong with my cousin that she would do this? And I am positive that the vast majority of data or education, so to speak, that she would be absorbing would be on narcissism. I say narcissism with quotes because it's not actual narcissism. It's just this weird internet monster psychopathy version of narcissism or of, anyway, you know what I'm saying. Now, can narcissistic people exploit, abuse? Yes. Can psychopathic people be narcissistic? Yes, they usually are. But people don't usually understand that construct. And it has been revealed to me just how confusing it is in that my co-host Umberto on my podcast, I've tested his IQ and he's like at the 99th percentile across the board. He's extremely intelligent. One could say a genius. And yet, even him, when I spend a lot of time explaining these constructs that we have about personality, especially the complicated ones like narcissism or psychopathy or histrionic or borderline or something, he falls into the traps that a lot of people fall into, that my students fall into as well, that linguistically they hear a phrase like self-absorbed and they don't know how we narrowly apply it in the clinical field. Because really anything could be, any sort of bothersome behavior could be described as narcissistic. That's the problem with that construct, right? Your partner is annoying to you. It feels as though they don't care about your feelings. Your partner's narcissistic. They don't care about your feelings. They're self-absorbed. That's not what we're talking about when we're saying self-absorbed or grandiose self-image or narcissism. That's not what we're talking about. But it's confusing, right? How would anyone know? And so I'm filtering everything the cousin is saying through the possibility that she's already been on TikTok, you know, because I'm trying to get at the data, right? And can I trust that assessment? You know, she's saying, yeah, she became introverted. She stopped reaching out. I mean, even introverted isn't, I think, being used accurately because of the way TikTok will use, not all, but many will use the word introverted, the construct of introvert. Most people think of introverted as being isolated or asocial, meaning avoiding any kind of social contact. That's not introverted. Introverted people absolutely reach out and need and want attachments and socializing. It's just to a different number of people that they're involved with. There's also stimulation issues. Anyway, point is that she's introverted, which I think means my cousin started to pull away, and then she says you could almost say she was self-absorbed. I think she just means she wasn't contacting me as much anymore. And just a side note, I just wish that people online would just say phrases like that. Like when people say like he's a narcissist, when I drill down on it, descriptors that they will use, I will say, just use those words. Like they'll say, well, he's hurtful. I say, okay, just say that. Don't make a conclusion about his personality. You can say he's hurtful. You can say you dislike him. You can say that he seems to not care about your feelings. Those are all non-clinical and understandable things that people would say. To claim you can diagnose someone with a personality disorder based on without any clinical experience. And again, I'll point out that research shows that half or more of clinicians don't really understand narcissistic personality disorder, and that's just one of the many personality disorders. So even if you've been through the education, even if you've treated people, even if you've had supervision around it, you still will struggle with understanding these constructs. They're very complicated. Anyway.
Hours a day, I let it consume me.
Yeah, I'm glad that they're reminding us how toxic the texts were. I kind of forgot just how horrific they were. Because the way she's described it is like, yeah, I don't know, I just kind of downward spiral. What? Every text you had, every letter that you typed into your phone, you had a chance, and you decided to continue with it. So it's not just like the way she's describing it, it's like, I don't know, I just sort of tripped and fell into it, and I just couldn't get out. It's like, no, you made literally millions of choices to do these things over the span of several months. They were reporting that there were texts like 30 a day to multiple, that was just to one person, and it's your daughter. So, all right, and I forgot about that too. My God, downward spiral. I was trying to suss out the real perpetrator. No, you were not. Or you are a very addled, confused, low IQ individual. I don't even want to insult people with low IQ. There's anyone with even a low IQ would understand this is not that. You're not doing something altruistically. I don't know. It's just, yeah. But it is interesting, though. I don't know about for you, but for me, the way that she presents or the way that they've edited her, she comes across like a nice person and someone that you could trust, someone that, and the husband even said she's a good mom in general. She's an attentive, loving, warm mom. That wasn't the word she used, but he used, but essentially that was what he was saying. So it's confusing. It's like, what is going on there? At the same time, she has committed some of the worst abuse you could possibly commit on a child. So how do we reconcile those things? It's hard, And right, not just on her child, but dozens of kids. And she was knowingly participating, or at least not intervening, as other kids were being bullied in a sense for being accused of being the bully on Lauren and Owen.
With her saying that she didn't send the first couple messages makes it sound a little bit weird, but I don't know. I think it might have just been her. Right.
That's another possibility. Will we ever know? Does the FBI have that data? I don't know. Yeah. Right. She could be lying about it. But right when I don't know. I tend to believe a lot of what she said when the police showed up, because she immediately admitted, and she didn't really obscure or minimize anything. She's like, yeah. And then when the husband confronts her about the job, she's like, yeah, no, I got fired a while back. So I tend to believe what she was saying in the shock of being confronted with it.
I think it was more of an escape. It more took me kind of out of real life in a sense, even though it was real life. So when I was really doing that and I wasn't myself, it removed me.
Okay, so she's saying she wasn't herself. So some people might think, oh, well, we're talking about multiple personalities or dissociative identity disorder. She's not describing it that way. Typically, if people are suffering from dissociative identity, they are not remembering what happened with this other alter. She's not describing it that way. And she's not saying, I have other alters or something like that. So it sounds like the way she's describing it is indicating that it's like another mode or some kind of other side of herself that she doesn't know about or isn't really her. There's another possibility, I think a stronger possibility, that this is her and she just can't really reconcile that with how she sees herself, right? And she definitely has a side of her that wants to harm other people, right? Or didn't care about harming other people. So anyway, to go back to the hypotheses that I have, and maybe it would be important to kind of delineate the other category that I've been talking about. So we have psychopathy and sadism. There's a lot of indicators that point in another direction than that. It still could be that, and there are various different ways that can manifest, and it can even go so far that someone could be so Machiavellian and so psychopathic that they would try to get out of it by confessing early or something like that. People, that does happen. It's rare, but it can. So, there's still that possibility. And people can be on the spectrum of psychopathy, meaning their empathy is on a spectrum. And it can be another issue that can be involved too. So there's that kind of category over here. Then we have the passive-aggressive personality, which I'm still having at the top of the list. There's not a lot of strong indicators because I would need much more data, but it does sound like some of the initial things that I would hear that would lead me down a road to gather a lot more data. The kind of other data that I would need in order to feel confident in applying that label would be a pattern of this, what she's calling a downward spiral of this other person throughout maybe her life. Sometimes obviously harming others, but sometimes maybe just more sneaky, that kind of thing. Who knows? We only have two categories of behavior. We have the cyberbullying of all the kids. I'm just going to lump that all together. And then her lying to everyone, that including her husband and daughter, that she has a job, 2 jobs that she's working. So those seem related to something that's going on for her, right? But those are the only 2 data points we have. They're pretty big ones because it wasn't just 1 or 2 texts, and it wasn't just lying for a month. This is going on for years that she's lying. So, but the way she's framing it, she seems to be heading in the direction of just like, I have this need. What did she say?
I think it was more of an escape.
Right, an escape, that she needed to get away from herself, that she didn't like herself or she didn't like her life, and she just needed to do something else. Okay, could that have been a part of the larger equation? Yeah. Could that still fit within the passive-aggressive personality? Yeah. Could someone be a psychopath and a sadist and do these things and then later try to justify it by saying these kinds of things? Yeah. Might she be leading up to blaming her husband or her marriage? Like, I was stuck and I was in a rut and I didn't know what to do and my husband was abusive and so I just needed a way out. Okay. But no. The typical things that people will consider or do when they have that need to escape themselves would be to become a different person, maybe online. That's probably the most common thing. Maybe flirt online, act like you're a different person entirely, maybe a different gender, maybe a different nationality, different age or something, just to feel like you're not. I've had clients that have done that for actually functional reasons. I had a teenager who, back when EverQuest or EverCrack was popular, that he needed to escape for gender and sexuality reasons from his family. I won't go to details, obviously, for confidentiality reasons, but he used EverQuest because it was so all-encompassing, and you could create whatever character you wanted to, and you interact with other people, and you could act like you were a completely different person from a completely different world, from a completely different body or a completely different sexuality or different gender. And so he had this obsession with the game, and he would rush home from school and he would play the game, and he felt like he needed to be this other person. That's the sort of thing that people will do. That is very available to everyone because online activity is fairly anonymous often. That's what they do. They won't brutally, repeatedly tear down their daughter through text in some of the most disgusting texts anyone has ever seen. And then try to get her to kill herself, what other sort of avatar or what sort of persona were you trying to adopt? That of a monster? Well, you succeeded.
Took me kind of out of real life in a sense, even though it was real life. So when I was really doing that and I wasn't myself, it removed me from my everyday life. It just kept going and going.
Yeah, it's just striking that she's willing to talk about it. I tend to believe that what she is saying at various times, whether it was when the police first arrived or months later when she's being interviewed for the documentary, that this feels genuine to her. Because if she were trying to deceive or trying to get out of it, she would just not agree to be in the documentary. Or she would say that someone else must have used the phone. I mean, there's so many ways that she could maybe even viably convince a lot of people that it wasn't her. She could have denied it right away, or even afterwards she could have been like, I don't know, I just felt like I was pressured to confess, or, who knows. But she's not doing that. So it's so striking. And it's not a strong indicator of anything, but it is notable and it is particular and it is something I just have to consider as I'm trying to figure out what went wrong with her. And it's still fitting within. So I promised I would at least illuminate a little bit what this. So we have psychopathy and sadism, dark tetrad kind of stuff, and then we have passive aggressive personality, which is at the top of the list. And we have this other, and she's talking about needing to escape, abuse, internalizing the abuser. Maybe someone really talked horribly to her when she was young, and she just never processed that, she did have this random idea of like, well, maybe if I'm not getting much back from these kids because they're not being communicative. So what if I said this? It won't be horrible, but I'll say it. And maybe they'll say, is this Chloe? Or, hey, that's weird. We were doing this to each other for attention. And who are you? Or I don't know. I mean, she doesn't seem super intelligent. So maybe she did have that idea. And then it just triggered something in her about her past, about the trauma. And then she's getting all that still would fit possibly within the passive aggressive construct, actually, now that I mention it. So it's, I guess there's the dissociative identity. Some people with dissociative identity won't really know that they have a different alter and will actually know a lot of what the other alter is doing. That's still within the realm of childhood abuse that's causing a syndrome in adulthood that would cause something like this. A compulsion. Some people have very strange manifestations of OCD that I've never heard of something even close to like this. We could use some kind of addiction construct of suffering, and when, like some people will engage in these behavioral routines habitually, and they almost enter into a trance, and through that they escape their pain. It can be gambling, it could be cutting, it could be it could even be substances, particularly substances that require a lot of steps, gear, paraphernalia, right? So you got to get the tinfoil out, you got to get the flame, you got to get this, and all of that. Before even taking the substance, the person has already kind of escaped themselves because they're involved in this very routinized routine that they have to concentrate on, and when they're doing it, they've escaped themselves to some extent. So it could be something like that, I guess. But again, my top hypothesis is the passive aggression, and in the interim months between being caught and being interviewed, she hasn't been through the therapy that she needs to go through. And so she has been trying to figure out, wait, what? And even the way she describes it, right, as she, at least in the edit, she's saying, and then it just sort of downward spiraled from there. And then I just couldn't stop. she, in the edit, doesn't have any explanation for that. She's not like, well, I was still trying to suss out the bad guy. I think she's lost. I think she is telling us that she doesn't know why she did it, but she just knew that she had to. And it felt like a different person because it wasn't actually a different person, but it was so divorced from who she really is. She's a good, caring, warm person. Who is this? And it can feel that way sometimes for passive, not always, but it can for passive aggressive people, that this other person that is doing these horrific things, like I gave the examples of the cheating or the breaking into the mentor's office, or the sometimes it'll be like, this isn't always the explanation, but people can rack up a bunch of debt in their kids' names or in their family members or their spouses' names as a way to get back at them. Sometimes we frame this as a shopping addiction or a spending addiction, and it often is. It usually is when that's happening. But it can even be a way to cause harm or to get back at someone. It's just, I'm frustrated with you and I can't do it directly. I can't even consciously be aware of it, but I've got to get back at you somehow. I've got to communicate that I'm upset about this. And so I'm going to very pathologically do it in this hidden way by racking up credit cards or by sending these texts, So anyway, I'm rambling.
Kind of picked up on some of her insecurities, her appearance, her hair, her looks, but honestly, the messages weren't really targeted at her insecurities.
Were they targeted at you? Like, were you sending these messages to yourself?
That very well, possibly.
What? What kind of question is that? I guess I appreciate any and all questions, because let's get at this from various different angles, but it kind of seems like the interviewer is trying to let her off the hook, right? Like, oh, it wasn't really at your daughter, it was at yourself. Okay, I guess. Okay, so let me entertain that. I suppose that is a psychological explanation. Self-hatred and projecting. Yeah, right. Okay, yeah. So people use projection colloquially, even in my field, in a way that isn't really true to the original meaning, which is to project an aspect of yourself that you hate. We all have insecurities, some people more than others, if you have a lot of them, and your daughter starts to exhibit some of the things that you hate about yourself, then you will possibly, depending on your differentiation level and your healing level and the trauma level, you will be tempted to project that aspect of yourself onto your daughter and then attack your daughter when really you're attacking yourself, when really you were being attacked or you thought you were being attacked when you were young. So, yeah. And then would we still conceptualize that within passive aggression? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, so that is in that category of other. We wouldn't categorize it in any sort of personality construct, but it would have this direct line of the relational trauma, someone berating her. It would have to be pretty severe for her to have done this. And then she internalizes that. She has this internal voice of just like, you're a piece of shit, you're a piece of shit, you're a slut, you're a piece of shit, you're a piece of shit. And then as a way to defend that we will use projection or projective identification. Listen to my deep dives on those. And you will find someone, maybe even groom them to agree with your projection so that you can even have an easier time to project, and then you attack the thing and you get temporary relief because you're not attacking yourself. So yeah, it's another hypothesis.
Because I was way too thin. I was not eating. So you could put me in that anorexic category.
And were you afraid she was going to hurt herself? Because there were messages telling her to kill herself.
And then there's the general concept of differentiation that you heard me talk about, that for lower differentiated people and for undifferentiated people on that end of the spectrum, particularly when they have kids, there's a higher likelihood that they will confuse the child for themselves, and they will mix feelings and thoughts and behaviors and needs and identities up with their child, enmeshment, that kind of thing. There's some signs of that a little bit. The way she reacted when she was caught, the fact that she was pretty involved in Lauren's life, maybe she's just close, who knows. But At least I think the interview is heading in that direction. All right, well, let's adjourn there for now. There's so much to talk about. So let's adjourn there for now. And tune in next time when I continue watching this documentary. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.